Welcome back to our next edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. I am Dan Siegel, joined as always by my co-host, Ben Anderson. Before we get started, just wanted to remind everyone, if you have just found us or have not subscribed already, please subscribe to our channel. It costs nothing on your end and helps us out a lot, so would appreciate that. In today's episode, I was thinking about the NBA draft, and I'm not a big NBA draft expert. My expertise lies in the college game pretty much exclusively when it comes to basketball. But I was looking at the projections, and you got your 2022 Player of the Year, Oscar Tshiebwe. Obviously, he's leaving, but he's likely going undrafted. And then, or at the very least, later end of the second round, you got your 2023 Player of the Year, Zach Edey, going back to school. Why? Because the NBA demand wasn't high. And there's really what I come to the realization, there's a fine line between a college superstar and an NBA prospect. Mostly this resides around backs to the basket big kind of players, but not all of them. So this inspired me to do today's episode, which we're going to talk about our top 10 college players that did not have NBA careers. And we're going to go back since 2015, top 10, like I said, college players. So what they did in college, the qualification, they did not really have NBA careers at all. Since 2015 is where we're going to go back. So Ben, take us away with number 10.
Yeah, we're going to travel to the ACC first with Notre Dame's Bonzie Colson. Now, this may not be necessarily a household college name, but when you look at his career with the Fighting Irish, he did everything you could ask him to do, especially as a four-year player who sort of had the typical college experience where he started on the bench. He was a good bench piece, averaged about 6 points a game during his freshman year, but really he exploded down in his sophomore and junior years. And what makes him stick out the most is he was an absolute tenacious rebounder for some of the better Notre Dame teams during Mike Brey's career, especially for a guy that's just 6'5". His ability to play a small ball center, small ball power forward was really just crucial, vital to making sure that his teams had success, especially, for instance, the 2015 team that pushed Kentucky in the Elite Eight for a spot to go to the Final Four. He was a piece on that team. He really played a huge role and was a great rebounder. Big ACC, just stalwart for all 4 years that he was there. He did have an injury during his senior year that sort of diminished his time in his last year in South Bend, but he still had a great experience, great time overall. Averaged double-digit rebounds for his final 2 years, averaged a double-double for his final 2 years as well. He only played 18 games in the NBA for the Bucks in 2019, but other than that, he didn't really have much else going on. He currently plays in Israel, but really just wanted to shout him out as having a great college career for Notre Dame.
Yeah, Bonzie Colson was one of my favorites of Notre Dame bigs that have a pretty long legacy over the last bunch of years. They've had pretty good bigs, but Bonzie Colson probably leads them all. Number 9 on this list is also going to be a big, much more known for his size in particular, though. And this is going to be Ethan Happ, basically a typical Wisconsin player. We go back over the last decade or so, and I think the first Wisconsin superstar you think about is Frank the Tank, Frank Kaminsky, but this guy definitely, his production spoke for itself, and he was a big impact guy all 4 years. He came right in there, and he provided this tough defensive presence. He was not the three-point shooter of Frank the Tank, but 17.3 points and 10.1 rebounds over his senior season, and that is for a guy that's defense first, so pretty incredible there. His freshman season, I think, was the one that they were national runners up. And he was just the third Badger to score 2,000 points. So he accumulated a lot of points over his 4 years, just was a solid player. I'm not going to quiz you on the other two because I'm not sure you would get them, but Alondo Tucker and Michael Finley are the other two. Sixth NCAA player also to get 2,000 points, 1,000 rebounds, and 4,000 assists. But after all this, he never really got his chance in the NBA. He went undrafted, played with the Bulls Summer League team, didn't make it, signed to play in Greece. us at CBB Review are big on TBT. We're one of the few sites that covers that in depth, and he did really well in the TBT back in 2020. But just overseas, basically, is where his game has been recently, and since he's been a college star.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think people really necessarily think of Ethan Happ as this great player because he wasn't on some of Wisconsin's better teams, but he had a fantastic career
Yeah,
all 4 seasons with the Badgers and really was basically the lifeblood of a couple of those teams, right? They had Happ and kinda no one else, so he was doing a lot of work down there in Madison.
yeah,
Now, we're gonna go over to our 3rd straight big for number 8. This is gonna be a familiar name. This is Kofi Cockburn, just an absolute monster during his 3 seasons at Illinois. I don't think you can describe it as anything else. He came in blazing, immediate impact at Illinois, averaged 13 and 8 as a freshman, but his best year was his junior year, where he averaged 21 and 10.6 rebounds a game while being consensus first team All-American, making him a two-time All-American, actually, because in his sophomore year, he was also a second-team All-American. Just an absolute monster in the paint. No one could guard him. He's a huge, just humongous human being, almost in a similar way to Zach Edey, even though Zach Edey's obviously got about 3 or 4 inches on him, but his physical presence is really was really unmatched during that entire time. I would not have wanted to be, a backup center in the Big Ten during those 3 years. That would have been quite scary for me. But he did decide to go out and declare for the NBA draft after his junior season, but he was undrafted, eventually signed a contract in Japan, where that is where he currently is now. Obviously, a bummer that he did not make it into the league. I think he could have definitely had a role in the NBA, not as a starter, but as a guy who plays spot minutes during foul trouble and things like that. But he chose the overseas route, but we all remember him as a great college player.
yeah. Perfect assessment. I agree. Like, he could have had a role in the NBA, but man, that guy was just a force to be reckoned with. Definitely a fun player to watch. We move on to number 7. We are going to go to the Big 12, and we're going to go to Kansas and Devon Dotson, who was there for just 2 years, actually. And guys who are there for 2 years don't really usually fit the mold of not having the NBA pedigree. But let me explain, because his freshman season, he basically just burst onto the scene and was incredible right away. If you guys don't know, Kansas opens the season in that Champions Classic it's pretty much every year, right? And they played Michigan State, and he scored 16 points in that game. I think Michigan State was one of the top teams in the country at that point, made several defensive plays, and since then he just was a really, really good player. Sophomore season, this is the one that kind of we're not sure where to take it, because it did end early due to COVID. He was the clear best player on the team for what was considered the best team in the country. And some of the players on that Kansas team did stick around for multiple more seasons. They were on that national championship winning team, but at the time, Dotson was definitely the best player on that team. So who knows what he could have done in that NCAA tournament if it happened. But Dotson ended up declaring after 2 years, signed with the Bulls, but unfortunately has just not been able to stick around at all, has barely any NBA minutes at all, and he's been predominantly a G League player.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly many players where we would have loved to see them cement their legacies at the college level that didn't have the chance to due to the 2020 season, but Devon Dotson is certainly one of them. And when you play for Kansas, when you're the starting guard for Kansas, that sort of speaks for itself. So I like this pick here at number 7. For number 6, we're going to go back to the ACC with a sort of unheralded player, in my opinion. But let's talk about Brice Johnson for a second. Played all 4 years in Chapel Hill, and he is sort of the typical 4-year Carolina player, I think you could say. I think the Tar Heels have had a lot of these types in their past, 10, 15 years, maybe since Roy Williams was head coach, and this is no exception. He built himself up similar to Bonzie Colson in the fact that he didn't do a ton in his freshman year, but by the time he was a senior, he was an All-American, just a fantastic player overall, averaged over 17 points a game, and over 10 rebounds there as well in his senior year. led the Tar Heels to a 1 seed, as well as the ACC regular season title and tournament title. The only thing stopping him from a national championship was, of course, Chris Jenkins' buzzer beater for Villanova to win in that championship game right there. But he was just a great player overall. The best player on that Carolina team that went to the national championship game. I don't think he gets enough flowers for what he did, especially considering he wasn't able to stick around for that next year where North Carolina won the national championship with players like Justin Jackson. But he was a crucial part of North Carolina's success. And you might think, hey, this guy looks like maybe he's a potential NBA player given his length and what position he plays. But I was looking back at his stats, and he didn't attempt nor make a single three-pointer during his entire senior season at North Carolina, which I thought was strange. That's not necessarily something I remembered about him, but he did not play more than a couple games in any particular season in the NBA, and he is currently in Japan as well.
Yeah. Anything for UNC to go back to those days and reminisce on these players. It really wasn't that long ago, but those 4-year players for Roy Williams were really the key to those national championship winning teams, or the teams that I should say made runs in the tournament, I guess, in Johnson's case. But moving on to number 5, and this is going to go back to the Big Ten, and we're going to go with Cassius Winston, who played from 2016 to 2020 at Michigan State. This was a player that took a couple years, or not a couple years, but just a little bit of time at least to break out. He was good, not great as a freshman, and as a sophomore too. But really what happened in his junior and senior seasons are what his legacy is based off of. He was a 2-time All-American. In 2019, he was just a monster in that postseason, starting with the Big Ten tournament where Michigan State won the Big Ten, and he was the Big Ten tournament MVP. Then their run to the Final Four, and he had 20 and 10 in that Elite Eight game where they beat Duke. So he's just a player who has both the production by volume and the big moments. He was actually the all-time Big Ten assist leader, and by a pretty decent margin. He's there at 890. I think the next guy is barely over 800. So he's got that. I don't know how long that's going to last, but he's there for now. And he got drafted in the second round in the NBA, but has only appeared in 7 career games and not many significant minutes at all.
College point guard leader. I mean, this is exactly what Tom Izzo wants in his point guard every single year, I'd imagine. And he cemented his legacy during that Final Four run in 2019. So I like this pick. We're going to stay in the Big Ten here for number 4, and we're going to talk about Caleb Swanigan. Now, of course, to start off with, this is a somewhat tragic story. Unfortunately, Swanigan did pass away in 2022 in Indiana after struggling, I believe, during COVID with weight gain. And he eventually did end up leaving the NBA and basketball altogether. He did pass away, which is, again, very tragic. And, the support that the Purdue and just NBA and college basketball in general gave his family, I think, was really heartfelt. But during his time at Purdue, he was an absolute monster. He started every single game he played there during his 2 seasons, and his second season was his better one. He averaged 19 and 13 a game, really just another one in the line of great Purdue bigs on 54% shooting. And I didn't necessarily remember this about his time in college, but he shot 44% from 3 on 2.5 3-point attempts a game. So this is not a stat on 10 attempts the entire season. He had some range in his game as well, and he was just really a dominant player for Matt Painter during his 2 years. A fantastic big in a line of great ones at Purdue, both at Purdue and in the Big Ten. He was drafted in the first round by the Portland Trailblazers, but his career never took off. He, again, was out of the league by 2020, and unfortunately, that's how things ended for him NBA-wise. But, man, in college, Swanigan was a tough matchup for any team he played.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad we were able to recognize him on this list. Moving on to number 3, and this is a guy I could talk about for a pretty long time, but I'll keep it to a couple minutes. And it is Virginia's Kyle Guy, who, I mean, he was just, his ability as a pure shooter was one thing, but also his ability to just create space, come off of screens, shoot with very little space, and shoot very quickly, and just turn his body, catching the ball all in one motion while shooting the rock like in a split second. It was really incredible to watch. It's something UVA has not had since Kyle Guy, and it's been able to be evident in their offensive production since 2019. But yeah, third team All-American twice. UMBC's loss, or their loss to UMBC, I should say, that Kyle Guy was pretty much like the picture of him like crying with his head down is the primary picture if you look up Virginia's loss to UMBC, and he took that to heart. He was posting all over social media, and what does he do? As you guys all know, turns that around, being the main piece to a national championship win the following year. Actually, I think a lot of people don't remember this, but he struggled a lot in the first few games of that NCAA tournament. It was really the Purdue game, that second half of the Purdue game in particular, where he was going toe-to-toe with Carsen Edwards, and that was really where he took off. And then in the Auburn game, obviously that signature moment where he was fouled in the corner with just 1 second and change left. I think it was 0.9 seconds actually, right? Yeah, 0.9 seconds, down by 2. 3 free throws for Kyle Guy, nails all 3. Virginia goes to the national championship. That was his signature moment, but he had plenty of other secondary moments there. Drafted in the second round, but to my surprise, he was never able to stick around, even on a 2-way contract. He just basically has been playing overseas, and that might be a decision because you can make plenty of money overseas depending on where you play, even compared to just being a pure G League player. But I think he's been fairly successful overseas. Obviously, I only see the good stuff and not the bad stuff. But yeah, that's Kyle Guy.
Yeah, absolutely. As a Virginia fan, of course, I mean, he will hold a special place in every fan's heart for what he did during that 2019 run. But that was just icing on the cake in terms of his overall career as well, all 3 years in Charlottesville. Now, the one person you could argue that was his biggest thorn in his side during his career is actually going to be number 2. You mentioned him already, Dan. This is going to be Carsen Edwards, and he was a fantastic player all 3 seasons at Purdue. But in terms of the peak performance, I'm not sure there's a higher one than Carsen Edwards' 2019 NCAA tournament run. Even though it ended at the hands of the Cavaliers in the Elite Eight, what he was able to do in 2019 was absolutely incredible. Of course, he broke the record for most three-point field goals made in an NCAA tournament, and he only did it in 4 games instead of doing it in 6 and making it to the national championship game. He scored 42 points, not once, but twice in that game. And his most memorable time, of course, was the game against Virginia, where he scored 42, made 10 3-point field goals, and caused Tony Bennett to rip up his play card because he made a shot with Kihei Clark just in his grill, banked it in probably with 5 minutes left in that second half. Just an absolutely unreal performance. But he was more than just his 2019 tournament as well. His sophomore season actually was arguably his best. He averaged 18.3 points per game on 50, 40, 80 shooting, which is really incredible. He actually averaged more points his junior year. He averaged over 24, but his efficiency, of course, went down a little bit. He was drafted in the second round by the Celtics, but never did much in the NBA. He currently plays in Turkey, but if you ask any college fan about Carsen Edwards, they're going to be able to tell you at least one game that he played. And I'm not sure how many people you can do that for that didn't end up playing in the NBA all that much. So that's why we have him at number 2.
That one game that he played, could we say, at least in recent, like the last 10, 15 years, or we'll say since 2015, because that's what this episode is going since, can we say that's by far the greatest performance in the NCAA tournament in a loss?
Yes. Yeah. In a loss, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's up there, just greatest performances overall. So,
yeah,
in a
for
loss.
Sure. Yeah, I'll agree with that. I'll take your side there.
Okay. Number 1, this guy, I mean, he was great in itself and was just a pleasure to watch. But then looking at his stats and his efficiencies was another thing. We're going to go with Markus Howard from Marquette. Number one, played also from 2016 to 2020. This guy was just 5'10", but there's no other way to put it. He was just a bucket. And he came right in and started doing it in his freshman year. He led the country in three-point shooting percentage at 54.7% in his freshman season, 20.4 points to follow that up in his sophomore year, where he led the country in free throw percentage at 93.8%. By the end of his career in his junior and senior seasons, he was just putting up like 35, 40, 45, 50-point games even, just with ease. He became actually the first player to score 50 points in a game in 3 straight seasons in NCAA basketball history, and that's still been the case. It's very, very rare that we even see like 45-point games. So Markus Howard in his senior season, actually, I think he averaged 28 points as a senior in the Big East. Markus Howard is the all-time leading scorer in Marquette history, as you could probably tell. And in Big East purely conference play games, he is the all-time leading scorer in the Big East. 28 points per game in the Big East. Like, we see Max Asmus and Antoine Davis and like their mid-major conferences put up those kind of numbers or close to those kind of numbers. To do it in the Big East, man.
Yeah, I don't think he's necessarily as appreciated as he should be, given that he didn't truly have a lot of success in the NCAA tournament. But if you just look at his stat lines, they're absolutely nuts, right? He never shot lower than 40% from 3, even when he was taking 8.1, 8.8, 10.7 attempts per game. And the teams are guarding him. I don't know he's getting guarded. Like, this is not, he's just running around getting open shots. He was the lead guard for this Marquette team. I mean, offensively, he was absolutely incredible.
Yeah. And he caused the Hauser brothers to transfer because like how do you function in offense that's just Markus Howard? So rightfully so. And they both, Sam had a very good year at Virginia and then has been sticking around the NBA. Joey had multiple very productive seasons at Michigan State. Yeah. You suggested putting Markus Howard number 1. And at first, having not looked at any numbers yet, I was a little bit, I wasn't sure about that, but then I dove into it and looked at the accolades, and there's absolutely no reason you can't put him number 1.
Yeah, it might be a little controversial, but the numbers are bonkers, and that's sort of where I fall on this.
All right, well, that will do it for today's episode of the CBB Review Studio podcast. Like I said, please be sure to subscribe if you have not already. A vast majority of our listeners are not subscribed, so hopefully we could change that, but appreciate that. Thanks for watching and listening, and be sure to, stick around if you have found us. So once again, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and take care.